Comfort Women, the unfinished story of wartime sexual slavery. Welcome to the table of contents where we'll be going over the introduction, the deception, the struggle, and finally our conclusion. Introduction and discussion. Why do you think some historical events take decades to be talked about? I want you to remember this. Despite everything we tell you, Japan still chooses to ignore this event in history and disregard accountability. This is a story about struggle, the war for women's rights, and silence. Trigger warning to anyone sensitive to the topic of sexual violence. Historical context, 1930 to 1945. In World War II, Japan was in an era of modernization, expansion, and militarization. During all of this change, they decided it was a good idea to expand territory, corrupting China, Korea, the Philippines, and several Southeast countries. While all of this was going on, Japanese soldiers were stressed. To help boost soldiers' motivations, they decided to create comfort stations in taken territories. Comfort stations are military-ran housing where women were raped and abused. The living conditions were poor, and most women faced health consequences. Japanese doctors would often come in to check the woman, but not worry about their true health. They only cared about if a woman was fit for the station. If she wasn't deemed healthy, she was killed. This prevented spreading sickness, STDs, and pregnancies. Who were comfort women? Comfort women were women who worked at the comfort stations all day and night in shifts, ranging from ages as early as 13 to mid-30s. From all over Asia, the higher percentage of women were from Korea, China, and the Philippines. These women were not volunteers. Many were deceived, kidnapped, or forced to perform sexual acts for Japanese soldiers.
All right, now we'll be talking about recruitment and deception, and these were some ways that comfort women were deceived and recruited into these abusive positions. So one was false job promises, trafficking and abduction, family pressure and economic desperation, and debt and bondage. And many girls were told that they would be nurses, factory workers, or housemaids, and recruiters painted it like the job was a way out of poverty. And once these girls were transported, they realized the truth, and by then it was too late and they were trapped. And then some girls were also straight kidnapped directly from their homes or off the street, and then others were taken during things like military raids in occupied areas. They also did debt bondage, so victims were told that they owed money for travel, food, or housing, and that debt was used to control them and justify ongoing abuse. So next we have some targeted demographics of some people that were targeted. So we have young girls and women, and typically it was mainly teenagers who were being targeted overall. And then we have colonized and occupied populations, so mainly like Korea, China, Philippines, Indonesia, and other parts of Southeast Asia. Basically, these girls were targeted because they had less power, and the language barriers basically made it harder for them to escape. And also, colonial systems already treated them as expendable. So this was basically about control, vulnerability, and power imbalance, not really coincidence. This was all planned. We're getting into comfort stations and what they actually were. I know like the term sounds soft, but it's very intentional. So the reality of comfort stations were like military-ran brothels set up near battle zones, and women were forced to serve soldiers repeatedly, often under violent conditions. And there was no real freedom or consent, and it was constant surveillance on the girls. And basically these conditions included things like physical and sexual violence, disease and lack of medical care, isolation from the outside world, and punishment for resistance or escape attempt. The truth behind the term comfort station is propaganda language, and it hides what was actually happening, which was like systematic sexual slavery, and also organized and maintained. It was organized and maintained by military structures. And that really matters because language can either expose truth or basically bury it.
In Korean cultures, experts have noted that whenever they undergo traumas, they'll choose to not speak up about them. We noted this also with comfort women as well. These victims, they struggled with speaking up despite undergoing the immense amounts of trauma and there being 200,000 of them. Take Narcisa Clavera, for example, who was only 12 at the time of her kidnapping and assault. When she finally chose to speak out, she stated, "If I could prevent the sun from setting, I would, because whenever night fell, they would start raping us." When victims did speak out and confront the courts, many cases were dismissed and no real progress was made. Filed in 1991, Korean victims sued under a civil rights violation. 35 members of the Association of Korean Victims demanded 5 things from the courts. They demanded an official apology, compensation of 20 million yen to survivors, a thorough investigation of the crimes committed, reasonably so, revision of Japanese textbooks, and a memorial museum. That honestly doesn't sound too bad considering the atrocities committed, right? But the Tokyo District Court dismissed this case, claiming that damages to the state were unacceptable under international law. We see the same kind of results from Song Shin-do's case. With Song Shin-do's case, she filed for 120 million yen on her own, and she was also just looking for an apology from Japan. The Tokyo District Court once again dismissed this case, claiming an individual had no right to sue the nation under international law. In the year 2000, 15 victims stood before a U.S. court and demanded reparations and an apology, once again for a third time. This case, also dismissed. It had no jurisdiction, as it took place here in the United States rather than in Japan or its homeland. There was also one more case that I took note of. It happened in 2015, and it was against Japanese corporations, 6 of them to be exact, and it was also dismissed due to a lack of liability. In the year 2021, though, the Seoul Central District finally locked in a win and managed to break through for the victims. They demanded 100 million won to 12 different victims. It wasn't until then that the victims began to make real progress. What would be most appreciated from Japan is simply a sincere apology. Victims have sued countless amounts of times, while the government continuously dismissed the cases, that is, up until recently. Japan claims to have made a permanent and irreversible agreement, but they've been sued for not following through. The only true support for these now women would be the organizations like the Association for Korean Victims, which I previously mentioned. The name used to classify these women in itself is a silencing tactic, and it's very dismissive. How? For starters, it was not just grown women that were taken, but it was also young girls. It was young girls as young as 12. The name Comfort, it was not just given on accident. It misleads the narrative that these girls were forced, instead making it seem like it was just a job they signed up for. The name also leaves no imagination for the violence that happened on first thought. This could be dangerous because, in all reality, these women were raped and these women were abused and coerced. Honestly, to me, these victims are stronger than the soldiers, and they should be remembered as such.
I'm going to be talking about memory and commemoration of comfort women. This section focuses on how they are remembered today. Even though these events happened decades ago, people around the world still continue to honor the victims through memorials, statues, and art. These are important because they raise awareness, educate others, and make sure these stories are not forgotten. One of the earliest memorials was erected in Tateyama, Chiba in 1986, marking one of the first public efforts to acknowledge what had happened. The first major memorial was later built in Seoul, South Korea, in front of the Japanese embassy. This statue was especially meaningful because it was installed to mark the 1,000th weekly protest held by survivors demanding justice and recognition. Since then, what started as a local movement has grown into a global initiative. Memorials can now be found across South Korea, Japan, the United States, and Europe. Many of these statues share similar imagery, like a young girl sitting in a chair, which has become a powerful symbol of victims and their experiences. In North America, there are also many memorials located in public spaces like parks and city centers. People often leave flowers on these sites, showing respect and remembrance. These memorials help bring history into everyday spaces, making it more visible and accessible to the public. Comfort women are remembered and commemorated through statues and art found throughout South Korea, Japan, the United States, and Europe. And my final slide is completely dedicated to those artworks. The goal is to educate people about the realities of wartime violence and make sure that these stories continue to be told. The memorials connect different countries through a shared effort to remember and learn. In Europe, for example, a statue in Berlin, Germany, became controversial and was removed in 2025 after pressure from the Japanese government, showing how this history is still politically sensitive today. At the same time, other places, like Sardinia, Italy, have installed memorials that continue to stand out and raise awareness. Advocacy groups have also played a major role in this movement. One example is the Comfort Women Justice Coalition, which helps support memorial projects, raise awareness, and advocate for justice and recognition for survivors. There are many memorials beyond the ones shown here. This slide includes a few additional examples, but there are dozens located around the world, and I've included a QR code that you can scan to explore more of them and see where they are individually located. And I hope that it can help show how widespread the effort to remember has been.